Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Hey, welcome, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we're going to continue our Best of the Decade series. And we've moved up to the 1960s. And I really love this series because it's almost like we're taking time travel through the history of horror films. And you really see how things changed and evolved. And for me, that's a lot of fun to look at the historical spectrum of the films we love so much.
Yeah, I agree. We get like a documented timeline of like how the culture shifted, right? And like in the 60s were really defined through cultural revolutions coming off the post-war era in the United States. And you can see that in a lot of the films that were made where they kind of explored violence and sexuality more in depth that they hadn't shown in film before. Whereas, horror films kind of gravitated more towards reality instead of like the aliens and the giant spider monsters. You had movies like Psycho and Night of the Living Dead and Rosemary's Baby, and they were just the topics were more grounded in reality situations.
Yeah, the horror is not some beast from another planet. The horror is your neighbor that you
Right.
don't know anything about.
Yeah.
And you're right. It was a time of a lot of change. The 60s saw the hippie movement, the peace and love. As a country, we at the end of the decade put ourselves into Vietnam. There was a lot of civil unrest. We put people on the moon. The 60s was a very rapidly changing and developing cultural decade, and I think that's kind of reflected in the movies of the era.
Yeah, I agree.
Some of the greats of the 60s. You mentioned Psycho, Peeping Tom, a British film from the beginning of the decade, and you mentioned Rosemary's Baby, Eyes Without a Face, The Innocents, The Birds, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the Roger Corman, Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe films, and the Italian Invasion, the Mario Bava films, and some of the stuff we're talking about here is films we've covered or touched on in the past. So I think it's pretty cool that, I think it's like a really transitional decade. And I think that's reflected in the two movies that we're going to talk about tonight. And the stark differences just 5 years apart brings.
Yeah, they're very different, but they also they were revolutionary to me. When especially going back and watching them again and looking at it from a different angle, you get to see how influential they were in media moving forward.
Absolutely. Our first film is definitely something that's probably never going to be duplicated on this show, in the fact that it's actually G-rated. It's not even PG-rated. It is G-rated. But it has long been held up as an example of fright based on suggestion, the power of sound, and the reaction of actors. And that movie is The Haunting from 1963, directed by Robert Wise. And this is the first filmatic telling of Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, something modern viewers are very familiar with from Mike Flanagan's miniseries.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I really liked about this movie was it had great dialogue. It had a great script. It's very dialogue heavy. You have to kind of follow, like, it's not like they have cheap lines back and forth and then there's a jump scare. The whole movie is character building, and seeing their banter back and forth and how they're going to react with the environment.
Well, one of the things I found interesting about the acting, and I thought was very good, is the lead actress, Julie Harris, is a 7-time Tony winner. Was a huge success, like unparalleled success on Broadway, and she brings those acting chops into this film, which was kind of a cool get.
Yeah, she does a phenomenal job. You can kind of see her slowly lose her mind, and I think it's done brilliantly.
Yeah, for sure. And just like Shirley Jackson's book, they kind of touch on at the very beginning, the house is evil, right? There's no reason. It's not on burial grounds. It's not cursed. And she makes it very clear in her book that some things are just unexplainable, and this house is just evil. And I kind of like that, like no explanation needed kind of thing.
Yeah, that the narrator says that in the beginning. The house was born bad, right?
Yeah, and I think that's almost word for word how she wrote it in the book.
Yeah.
It was built by a man named Hugh Crane, who saw his first wife die as she was just pulling into sight of the house. His second wife die in the house, and eventually his heiress daughter passes away inside the house. And through all this death in the family, the house reverts to her caretaker, who then hangs herself. And we see all this in the very first couple minutes, and it's kind of like a brief history of this house and its evil intent.
Which I thought it was interesting that they could show all that and still be G-rated.
Yeah, and it's, there's no blood, there's no monsters, there's no everything in here is the power of suggestion.
Yeah, like even with the hanging, you just see the feet.
Yeah.
Or like with the crash with the carriage, you kind of just see the horses kind of like neigh and go up, and then like you kind of see a wheel spinning. There's no gore.
And some of that's very effective. When you see the woman climb the stairs, and she's got the rope in her hand, and the next thing you hear is the sound, and you see the feet. It's like that's as effective or more effective than seeing her blue face with her tongue sticking out.
Right, I agree.
It really is it's like a glimpse of dementia out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah, well said.
So the house now reverts to distant relatives in Boston, and they bring in Dr. John Markway to assemble a group that they want to either verify that the place is haunted or debunk the haunted reputation of the house. One way or another, they want to get to the answer. We meet Eleanor, who is troubled, very odd. She has an awkward relationship with her family, and we know that she was an adult caretaker for her ill mother, and it's almost like she never had a real human relationship outside of her family, and she just paints that awkward presence right from minute one.
Yeah, and she kind of has this very juvenile sense of like I need to get out of this house, like a 17, 18-year-old, right? Like she's like, I gotta get out of here, I gotta go do my thing, and she's trying to get the car, and and they're kind of fighting over the car. But she's like, well, it's half mine, and I pay rent to be here, and it's almost like she's like the daughter, like trying to like get out.
Yeah, she does act like a troubled 16-year-old. But yeah, the mother passed away. Well, it was her car. Now it's half mine and half yours, so I can take it. Well, no, you can't.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like I said, it was an interesting script. Like I was like, wow, they're really kind of painting this like these juvenile siblings kind of fighting over this thing.
She's a recruit for this project, and they touch briefly on this, very briefly, in that she's recruited because her house was hit by stone falling from the sky for 3 days straight.
Right,
an unexplained phenomenon that they somehow attribute to her psychic or mental abilities.
Yeah. Some kind of supernatural thing is surrounding her that would be of interest to them.
She arrives to Hill House, and Mr. Dudley has the place locked up, but she talks her way in. And as she pulls up, we get our first shot of a wide shot of Hill House, and it's dark and imposing. It's got pillars and angles, and they did a really good job of it's like a scary vision looking back at you when they show the house.
Yeah, like the different lighting that the house has, like they want it to make it seem like it's alive, like it has a presence. So kind of like the lighting changes on it a little bit. And it's interesting she gets room 238 because I was thinking of the Shining with room 237. I wonder if Stanley Kubrick did that on purpose.
It could be.
Yeah, it had
of course, in the book in The Shining, it's 217.
Yeah. But Stanley Kubrick, as far as making the film, right?
Yeah.
Let me have one number different.
Yeah, we talked about that was at the request of the actual hotel because they had a room 217, and they figured no one would want to stay in there, and it's a gross miscalculation because it'd be the most booked out room for the next 20 years.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be looking to stay there.
Yeah, like how cool would that be? So she arrives inside. Mrs. Dudley shows her to her room. The whole time, there's an inner dialogue in Eleanor's head. We get to hear her thoughts almost in a discussion back and forth with herself. Like she's not right from minute one. Like she's not evil. There's something off about her, right?
Yep.
Theodora arrives, and she's a psychic, so we understand why she's there. And the two women immediately hit it off. They're like, "Oh, we're going to be friends. We're going to be like sisters." And they start exploring the mysterious huge house. And in their exploits, they encounter Dr. Markway and the potential heir to the house, Luke Sanderson. And we find out it's just going to be the four of them. All the other experts, quote unquote, that were coming in, all bailed. They read up on the history of the house and they didn't want any part of it. So it's just the four of them.
Yeah. And so we kind of get like, all the different characters. You have the psychic, and then you have Eleanor, who's kind of like already a little shaky in her mind, and then Luke kind of comes in and he doesn't believe in any of this stuff, so he's just kind of acting like a playboy, like I'm gonna own this someday, so go ahead and check it all out. And he's just like he's making martinis and stuff, and he's like, whatever, let's just have fun while we're here.
Yeah, he's the spoiled rich kid, and he looks at everything with dollar signs. They go into this huge and elaborate library, and they're like, wow, and he's like, oh my God, 25 cents a book. This is going to be great for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and at one point he says, he's like, "Do you know what a haunted house does to property value?" Like, like he brings it up. It's comical.
It is, yeah. The group they sit and discuss over dinner what the expectations are, why they're all there. The Dudleys made it very clear in a weird scene when Eleanor first arrived. She's like, "I serve dinner at 6. I'm gone by 7. I serve breakfast at 9. I clean up at 10. We will not be here after dark. You will be alone, and there will be no one to help you." And she says this over and over. And at the very end, after she says it to Eleanor and Theo, she just gives this weird grin, like the Cheshire Cat. And then, because she's so like monotone and dour the whole time, then all of a sudden she just gives this weird grin, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. It's a good effect because it makes you wonder. Like the second time it happened, when she gives the same speech to Theo, I was like, is she one of the ghosts? Like it kind of throws you off a little bit. Like,
yeah. Yep. So they wrap up. They all go to bed. Eleanor wakes to a loud pounding, and she goes into the other room. They're connecting rooms, and Theo hears it too. And they get in bed and they huddle together, and they're frightened, and the air gets cold. And there's just this loud pounding, and then they hear these footsteps in the hall, and then a super loud pounding on their specific door, scraping noises like something's trying to get in. And this is kind of, if you watch AFI's 100 Creepiest Moments, this is the moment they use, because it has, I think, it doesn't show anything. It uses the actors' reactions, and it uses great sound design to whip up this frenzy of fear.
Yeah, it's well done too. And at one point, I think they have like this really good like fisheye lens shot of the room, like coming down on them. It's really well shot.
Eventually, the noise just ends, gone. They go and they open the door, and the two men are out there, and they say they've been out in the yard chasing a dog through the property. And it's like, well, that's weird. There's no dogs here, because they blame them, like, well, are you guys playing a prank out here? They're like, no, we just came inside.
Well, and not only that, but they chased the dog out of the house, and then Theo brings it up. She's like, well, wait a second, there was a dog inside the house. Like, how did it get in here? And so now there's just a bunch. They're all puzzled.
Yeah, and it if you didn't know better, if you didn't have the history at the beginning, you would suspect maybe that the guys are in on this and they're performing some kind of trick for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But we kind of already know better, so there's not a lot of mystery there. Like, you don't really think it's them.
Yeah. Like when they first show up and open the door, they're like, "What's wrong, ladies? You look like you've seen a ghost," And then Theo's like, they start laughing. They're just like, it sounded like someone was knocking on the door with a cannonball.
Yeah. Right. That's what it sounded like too.
Yeah.
The next morning, there's writing on the wall, and it's directed specifically at Eleanor. And she's angry and upset, and she blames Theo. She said, "Did you write it?" And they begin this very odd back and forth for the rest of the movie. They're like best friends, like sisters, and then there's moments where they say awful things to each other, like they hate each other's guts, and then it goes immediately back to the other end. And I'm like, this is so weird, and I think it's an insight into the tumultuous nature of Eleanor's mind, but Theo's equally in play in all these discussions. I found it very weird.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was because of her psychic abilities that maybe she can kind of understand like the strange thoughts that Eleanor's having. I get at one point in the beginning of the movie, Eleanor's like, "I'd like for a monster to eat me," and then she goes, "No, what are you talking about?" Like, and she like snaps out of it. Like it's really interesting dialogue that she has with herself.
Yeah. The group starts exploring. They find the creepy statues of the original family out in kind of a garden, almost like a greenhouse room. They find the library, and here Eleanor decides she's not going in because it smells like death. It reminds her of the sick room where she cared for her mother. And we know this is the room where the companion that inherited the house hung herself. So
Yeah,
she's
and
kind of in
I
touch
think
with the room smells like death. Well, because it was here. Eleanor has a vision, and she's starting to lose it a little bit. And John decides that her and Theo need to share a room. And they share a room, and they revert to best friends. Theo gets her drunk, and this is where she starts talking. Some of the inner thoughts in her head come out, and she says she never wants to leave Hill House. She loves it here. She feels like she has a purpose here. And like this is such a dramatic change from being scared to death the night before.
yeah, Theo has she has an interesting line. She says she's like, "You've got foolishness and wickedness mixed up." Because because Eleanor calls her wicked, and she's like, "No, we're just drinking and being foolish. You're confused about the difference." And they kept putting some interesting lines in the movie. I thought were really good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they dabble into psychological areas that,
Yeah,
they don't probe deeply, but they give glimpses, and it's very interesting.
hmm
We find that there's a cold spot outside the door to the nursery, and that is the heart of the house.
yeah,
Right?
and Luke says, "Hey, this would be a good place to chill our beer." That's
Yeah,
all he cares about. Yeah,
yeah. He's an odd duck for sure.
he's the
That
comedy relief for sure.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, you're right. He's the doctor. John plays everything straight. You got the two girls, and then he is the goofball.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that night, they're sharing the room. There's more disturbances, but they kind of ignore it. And Eleanor is holding Theo's hand, and she's having this inner dialogue about everything that's going on. And she's talking about how hard Theo is squeezing her hand. And, this goes on for a minute or two. There's a little girl crying somewhere in the distance and more pounding. And then Eleanor wakes wide awake and sits up and is looking at her hand, and Theo is over on the other side of the room sleeping.
yeah, and like
And
not hearing it.
she's not near her, and she wonders who or what was holding her hand. And I thought that was a really good example of there's nothing there. Like they show you nothing, they tell you nothing, but imagine laying in bed scared with your eyes closed, and somebody's holding your hand, and you wake up to not know who it is because it's not who you thought. Very
All the
creepy.
lights would go on. I'd be calling people. Just this is a great example. This movie is a great example of a less is more.
Yeah, exactly. John comforts her. Theo makes fun of her, and they begin to argue again, like they were just best buds. It's so weird that dynamic they have.
Yeah.
And then there's an odd twist when John's wife Grace arrives, and she is the ultimate cynic. She doesn't believe any of it. She thinks they're all just wasting their time, and she's going to stay in the nursery for the night. And they advise her against it, but she's not to be deterred. Everyone else goes to the parlor so they can all be together. And they wake up. There's noises upstairs. There's steps. There's screaming. And they try to leave, and the door is breathing. The only special effect really in the movie.
Pretty much, yeah, because it has this like warping effect that it does to it. Actually, it was pretty good.
Yeah, it looks like the house is breathing, but
Yeah.
it won't let them out. They hear breaking glass, and they get through. They run to the nursery, but Grace is gone, and now Eleanor is completely mad. She talks to the statues. She's dancing wildly throughout the house, and she wants to be a part of the house. And you feel at this point that the presence of the house has wormed its way into her disturbed psyche and really got its hook into her.
And this was the part that really reminded me of The Shining, because she's saying the house wants me, which kind of like, if like in the book, like Jack Torrance thinks the house wants him, right?
Yeah.
Like he's convinced. Yeah.
Yeah. She goes into the library and starts climbing these rickety spiral steps. They're coming off the wall and they sway with movement, but she's going up to the top. And we feel that she has bad intentions, just like the caretaker who hung herself.
That hung herself. Yeah.
We figure, okay, this is something like what this woman must have went through before this all happened.
Yeah, make her lose her mind and then kill herself in the house. Yeah.
The group comes in and they try to talk her down, but she won't come down. She won't come down. John starts climbing up after her, and the stairs are wobbling badly, and you're not sure they're going to make it, but they both get to the top. And it was clear that she was going to jump from the top because she didn't have a rope, or at least that's what I thought.
Right.
And John convinces her, like, we got to come down. Let's go. We got, you're okay. Come on. And as he starts to lead her away, she looks up and there's a trap door over the steps, and it opens and Grace's face is centered squarely in it. And Grace looks demented.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she faints.
Yeah. It's like the one jump scare.
And no one else sees the face. Just she looks up and there she is, just looking down, peering at her.
Yeah.
So when she wakes up, John says, "You got to leave. Like, I shouldn't have brought you here. This is not good for you." She's objecting wildly, but they physically bring her out, put her in the car, and say, "You got to go." And so she drives out in the dark. Her inner voice is having this all kinds of dialogue. It's all over the place. And as she's driving, we see Grace again now stagger out from behind a tree into the middle of the road. And Eleanor swerves.
And it's very much like a Mr. Slenderman thing. Like you kind of just like see like a ghostly body like move between one tree and another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, Eleanor swerves to avoid her, and she crashes into a tree and she dies.
Yep.
And the group decides they're all packing up and leaving. But the house has claimed another, and Eleanor will forever remain in Hill House.
Yeah.
And that's the movie, and that's
it. It just ends right there. It's really dark. It's a very dark movie. As lighthearted as a lot of the dialogue is, and there's the little bits of like comedy and the way they're having conversations, and no one else is really truly convinced that it's haunted, and Eleanor's kind of the only one that's losing her mind. Right. And like everyone else is just kind of like having drinks and dinner and like, having discussions. And she's the one person losing their mind. It's not like all four of them are. Right. Which is an interesting dynamic in the movie. Like she kind of just loses it. And then you have this climax at the very end where she just dies and everyone's like, okay, we got to go.
Yeah.
Like this is over. Yeah.
Yeah. And the house wins.
Yeah.
That's kind of the summary
There's
of it.
No logical explanation to it. There's no face of evil. Right. It's just that they've realized, okay, yeah, this place is cursed. I think we got to get out of here.
Yeah. And for years, this was on critics' lists. And if you read like historical critical assessments, this was often viewed as one of the finest haunted house movies ever made. And it's a little dated for modern audiences. The lack of blood and action and jump scares, maybe people might find it a little dull. But if you look at the nuance and you look at what they achieved, again, this is the only G-rated movie that's ever going to be on this podcast. I can almost promise you that.
Yeah, exactly.
They achieve a lot with very, very little.
Yeah, I mean, think about the task, right? Like if I were to say, okay, make a haunted house movie That's rated G. That has some good chills and interesting perspectives, and it's you don't have a lot to work with, and
No.
and they accomplished it, right? They made a legitimately good haunted house movie that's rated G with no gore effects whatsoever, no real jump scares, and it's effective.
Yeah. All right. Our second film in Best of the 1960s, and I'm going to say that to me this represents the largest leap forward in horror films. You look at the movie we just talked about, and you move forward 5 years, and you think like, okay, that means let's look at a film right now from 2019. It's the same. There's no discernible difference between a 2019 film and 2024 film.
Right.
Well, in 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. Again, I've mentioned on this show before, I consider it to be the birth of modern horror. Yep. And I can't imagine a greater leap from 1963 to 1968 than what we just saw with this movie.
Yeah, this movie is so gargantuan because it creates an entire genre that we celebrate to this day. And I don't know of any other movie that's ever done that.
Yeah, I would argue maybe the only jump similar would be maybe from 1968 to 1973 when you jump from this movie to The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
But then you string those two together, and I can't imagine a greater leap than from 1963's The Haunting to 1973's The Exorcist in what our movies show and the depth of horror that we really get to probe visually, special effects wise, and just the stories they're willing to tell.
I agree. It's exponential. Right. Yeah. We have a 1968. Now we're watching a little girl on her knees eat her father's flesh. Right. Like,
yeah.
Or Cooper or whoever, you know what I mean? Like she's sitting there eating.
Yep.
Like it was just like radically different.
Yeah. I've seen this movie so many times. I watched it again. I'm always just amazed at what they pulled off, and reading more about the production and the money and how they did everything. I just found myself even more impressed, even though I've seen it dozens of times.
It's very impressive, and it's public domain.
It's public domain.
This movie's on TV screens in more movies than any other movie.
Absolutely. As an amateur filmmaker or a low-budget filmmaker, why would you go solicit the rights for something when you can put one of the most iconic, well-known, and influential films on your screen in your background for free? It's a no-brainer.
Right. Yeah. It's a no-brainer.
The reason the copyright was messed up was because the film was originally distributed as Night of the Flesh Eaters, and at the last minute they changed the title because of a similarly titled movie about flesh eaters coming out, and when they reverted the title to Night of the Living Dead, they never moved the copyright. So from the minute this movie was released, it was basically free to go wherever.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we'd have a Flesh Eaters instead of a Dead series. We'd have the Flesh Eater series, right?
Yeah, I think the Dead just, I don't know if it would work the same.
I don't think it would at all. Yeah, I think this worked out perfectly.
If you remember, we were talking last year at a convention. I met and got to speak briefly with John Russo, mm-hmm. And I'm not a memorabilia collector. I'm not a autograph seeker.
Right.
But he was at a booth and he was distributing original scripts for Night of the Living Dead, and he would sign them and put a personal note in there. So after having, just a 5 or 7 minute conversation with the man, which was fascinating. It was awesome to speak to him. Just after that conversation, my wife's like, you can't leave without buying one of the books. So I bought the book. He wrote a nice little note in there. It's on my bookcase awesome. Now. And it's like, because of the reverence I hold this movie with, it is a cool thing to have.
It's a very cool thing to have, and especially like it's not something you just ordered, right? Like you got to have a genuine conversation with them, so there's that gets tied into it.
Yeah, so we start with Barbara and Johnny visiting their father's grave in a hilltop cemetery,
Pittsburgh.
Johnny, outskirts of Pittsburgh. Yeah. Johnny's a real douche, total douche. Yeah. Teasing his sister, he's making fun of her, he's annoying the whole time, and he utters the famous, they're coming to get you, Barbara,
Yeah.
which is, in retro, yeah, he's being a jerk, but the line is so awesome that, that it just, that's one of the first things I think of when I think of this movie.
Yeah.
A man staggers, kind of shambles through the cemetery, and he's like, "Oh, there he is. He's coming for you now, Barbara."
Yeah. He's tall and lurchy. Yeah.
And he's taunting her, and she wants to apologize to the man for her brother being such an idiot, and the man does attack her, and Johnny goes over, and probably the weakest part of the film is the Johnny and this shuffling ghoul fight. Is that they're pushing each other like you could not push over a piece of paper.
Yeah. Yeah. They're kind of just holding each other back and forth.
Yeah, that part is pretty weak.
And then Johnny just kind of falls over and he's dead.
He falls over. He hits his head on the
On a
gravestone
tombstone or something. Yeah.
and snaps his neck. In the 1990 remake that Romero wrote and Tom Savini directed, they enhanced that greatly. The struggle is much better handled, and the snap of the neck it goes from being a what just happened to a gruesome
to a Tom Savini. Yeah.
He just snapped his neck.
Yeah.
But so Johnny dies. Barbara runs to the car. Johnny's got the keys. The man is attacking. He picks up a rock and smashes the window, so she is left with no choice but to throw it in neutral and roll down the hill.
And it's funny. It's funny when you watch this movie. People will sit there. I've actually heard people say, "Well, zombies don't do that, right? Like pick up bricks and stuff like that." And it's like you have to understand, this is the guy that invented all these rules, so they can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, on the way down the hill, she drives into a tree for no real good reason that I could find.
Oh, it's in the script.
Yeah. So the man's pursuing her. She runs to a large farmhouse and locks herself in. Another thing they corrected in the 1990 remake is Barbara in this movie. You feel for her at the beginning because she's being picked on by Johnny and he's such a jerk. Barbara is nothing but an annoying, whining shrew the entire film.
Yeah, they give her more character in the remake.
A lot more character, and she kind of stands up and fights, and she's and I don't want to pick on her for the trauma that she went through, but everyone's kind of going through the same thing, and she becomes the worst character in the movie.
Yeah, she's kind of comatose and shocked the whole time. Can't really get it together. Yeah,
and it's like Ben's talking to her, and she just won't answer, and she just stares off into space, and it's like it's pretty bad. Inside the farmhouse, she finds a partially eaten corpse, and she runs outside with the idea of fleeing, but she runs into Ben, who brings them both back inside and locks up. Ben is Dwayne Jones, excellent actor, and the first time a black man was a heroic lead in the film that in no way had to be subservient to white people.
Interesting.
Sidney Poitier had films in the 60s where he was the lead and the hero, but his character was specifically written to be subservient to white people in charge to make it more palatable for white people to accept, which is just the most asinine thing when you historically look back.
Yeah.
That's part of what made the 60s the 60s.
Yeah. And, it goes back to, we were talking earlier about how the 60s was a lot of cultural revolution, and you could see that through some of the films, and this is one of them, right? They're kind of pushing social boundaries with the film.
And you listen to Romero talk about it, and it had a big impact. It really did. If we watched the documentary on the history of Black horror, it's on Shudder, and it's excellent. But it specifically talks about the doors that this opened that may have never opened, or hopefully someday they would have opened. But what Dwayne Jones' portrayal of Ben did, and Romero said, that's all great. He was just the best actor. When he read, he did the best job. Which what I love about that is it tells a statement, but Romero, the statement should be you don't care what the man's
Right.
skin color is.
Right.
And Romero didn't care what the man's skin color was, which is
Right.
is like the perfect, what we were trying to get to.
Exactly. That, that everyone has the equal opportunity and the best person will get that job. And then it's worked out perfectly in that direction to open that door for more people to have that opportunity.
Yeah. So Ben's got a truck, but he has no gas. And this farm has a gas pump. And he says, if we can get gas in the truck, we can leave. He kills a couple on the outside. While he's doing that, he leaves the door open, which is just insane to me. But Barbara's like comatose and just sitting there paying no attention.
Yeah.
One wanders in, so he has to kill that one as well.
And, another thing that's brilliant about this film is it's real simple, right? Like from here on out for the rest of the movie, it's a real simple plan. There's nothing, it doesn't get convoluted with subplots or anything like that. Like it kind of there's just a simple plan that they have and they have to execute it. And the timing, the pacing of the movie is good.
From here, other than the cemetery, it's a single location shot film.
Yep.
It's the farmhouse in the yard. And they didn't have the budget to build a farmhouse. They didn't have the budget to rent a farmhouse. They found this farmhouse that was scheduled to be demolished. And they let them use it, and you can damage it in any way you want. And one of the coolest things about that I didn't know until I just recently read was there was no cellar. That basement is not in that house. I started watching closely after I read that. The basement door is literally
upstairs.
a hole cut into sheetrock that they swung back and forth. There's no door there.
That's interesting. Yeah, because they never show a wide angle shot of coming down the stairs into the cellar. It's always a double shot.
Yeah. It was actually shot in the basement of the office that they worked out of. Romero shot commercials and so forth.
Yeah.
But yeah, they just cut a hole in the sheetrock, and that was the cellar door, which is
it's
that kind of stuff.
It's amazing when you give someone, when you give an artist limited resources, what they can do.
For sure. So Barbara's starting to get upset. She's starting to come unraveled a little bit. And Ben's like, hey, look, I need your help. We got to start boarding up these doors and windows. And at this point, his goal is to keep out whatever's in the yard and make it through till they can get help.
The ghouls.
Yes.
Yeah.
They never use the word zombie in this film.
Correct. Yeah.
They're always the ghouls. But Barbara wants to go looking for Johnny. And we note that the horde outside is growing. They're aware that they're in there now, and they're attracted to it. In a part of the movie that it's definitely outdated, in a hysterical fit, she slaps Ben, who then just slugs her right in the face.
Yeah,
which obviously is not how you would write it today, and unfortunately that they wrote it that way. Kind of a product of the times, I guess, but that doesn't make it right.
Right.
And he doesn't even slap her. Like you see
he slugs her. Yeah.
The old cliche of smacking. So get a hold of yourself.
Yeah.
He just pops her. It's like, okay, all right, easy, fella.
Yeah. I mean, it's like he would have like broke her nose. Like he punches her. Yeah, he punches her the same way he punches Cooper later. He kind of just
And they so she faints or is knocked out, whatever. It seems like she fainted because she.
Yeah, but then he picks her up and places her on the couch, and he was trying to like have her get. He could have just shook her. I don't know.
There had to be a better way.
Yes,
obviously not how you'd put it in a film today.
Yeah.
They're listening to details of the epidemic on the radio, and they learn that the ghouls fear fire. So Ben takes aside like a little occasional chair. Fabric chair, and he covers it in lighter fluid, pushes it out in the front yard, and lights it on fire. And they kind of like move back a little bit.
Like, oh, yeah.
He finds a rifle, and at this point, two men emerge from the cellar. They have a little bit of discussion of like, well, you guys were here the whole time. Didn't you hear us up here?
Yeah.
And first, we meet Harry Cooper, who's an obnoxious dude.
A coward, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, he's like, well, we couldn't hear anything down there. And then a minute later, he's like, oh, we heard you guys rustling with them. And he's like, I thought you couldn't hear nothing down there.
Yeah, Ben picks up on it. He's like, you guys better get your story straight. Yeah.
And this is where, like, Ben is not subservient to Cooper at all. In fact, at one point, and this is something that it's mind-boggling that it was such a big deal. But at this point, he says, I'm the boss up here. You can be the boss down there. But up here, I'm the boss. And it's like, part of me wondered, like, how many closed-minded people of the era found that like the most horrifying part of the movie.
Yeah, they're sitting there kind of grumbling like this, like, whoa.
Well, that can't happen. Like, it's just ridiculous. But
like people would say, oh, that's woke, right? Like, like nowadays, they get mad at anything like that.
Yeah. So it's Harry Cooper, his wife Helen, and their daughter Karen. They're down in the basement along with a young couple, Tom and Judy. Karen is sick, and Harry argues that the basement is the safest place. Nobody can get in there. It's got strong locks to secure it. It's the best place to hide out till this thing is over. Ben doesn't want to be trapped. He's like, if they get through, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, he's like, that's a death trap, right? Like, yeah, he says it.
At this point, a couple ghouls reach through the boards and grab Ben, and he is forced to shoot him. So we know the rifle works.
Which is, I mean, it's a good reminder, like the pacing when they have this stuff happen throughout the movie. Like, it's a good reminder that there's constant chaos outside, right? Like, it's not like they're having these calm conversations. It kind of it reintroduces to the audience throughout the movie that like there's a lot of panic going on, right? So it's not like they get to have these calm civil conversations and oh yeah, there's zombies outside. It's like they're a constant threat, right? They constantly try to break in. Yeah.
And I really liked how every time they show you a glimpse through the boarded up window or door, like the horde is bigger,
right?
There's just like a growing sense of dread,
right? Like, and they're able to do that on such a limited budget, like to have these little nuanced things happen throughout the conversations that they're having in the house, like kind of like allow the audience to know there's this impeding doom and kind of keep like the tension going. It's done very well for its time, for the year it was made, for the budget it was made on at the time. Like it still holds up.
Yeah. So Tom and Judy decide they're going to stay up with Ben and Barbara, while Harry decides he's going to lock his family in the basement. He goes down, and his wife Helen is made aware of this, and she is not happy. She doesn't want to be locked in the basement. Where's Tom and Judy? Who's up there? What's going on?
Right. Why are we dividing ourselves? Right. What's going on? If they're up there, right.
She wants to go up and talk. She seems to be the more reasonable, and as you mentioned, Harry demonstrates he's a coward and really doesn't want to do anything other than and I can get protecting your family, but at this point, you're all in this together.
Right, and part of protecting your family is getting along with the other people that have now become part of the picture, right? And being there's a political savviness you have to have with these people, and that's part of protecting your family too, not just being being ignorant and just like, no, we're going to go downstairs and being hard-headed. That's not protecting your family.
So she goes upstairs, and they found a TV, and they plug it in, and they got a channel going. And they hear the news report telling people to go to local safe stations. And they're showing on the screen, like, here's all these places you can report to be safe and be protected. Where the original message on the radio was lock yourselves in, stay in your houses. They're saying, now don't do that. They're saying you got to get to these safe places.
That's kind of like that's kind of how national emergencies go. Whenever there's always like updates, like, well, the thing we said earlier, we've got to change it, right?
We didn't mean it.
Yeah, we didn't mean it. Yeah.
We didn't have enough information to at the time.
Right.
Yeah. So they decide they gotta find the keys to that pump, fuel the truck, and get to a safe haven. They find the keys. They're in the basement actually, and they decide that Ben and Tom knows how to drive the truck. They're going to go out and fuel the truck. Well, Harry is going to throw Molotov cocktails from the upstairs window to clear space. It's a fairly decent plan, and Harry is actually going to help. At the last minute, when Tom and Ben go outside, Judy runs out because she doesn't want to be away from Tom. So the three of them get in the truck. They clear the zombies. They head over to the fuel pump to start filling the truck. Unfortunately, Tom accidentally sets the truck on fire, because they got a torch to hold back the zombies, and they're doing gasoline, and it's not a good combination. Unfortunately, he sets the truck on fire, and they said, we got to get away from the pump. So him and Judy get in the truck and they drive away, far away from the pump. They stop and they try to get out. Judy's arm is caught, or her buckle's caught.
Yeah.
And in an instant, the truck blows up. In a very low budget explosion, but the truck blows up.
Yeah, which was really well done. I liked it.
Killing them both, unfortunately. They were nice young couple. We were really rooting for them the whole time.
Yeah. They were trying to get along with everyone, be reasonable. They were good characters.
So Ben runs back to the house, fights his way through the horde. Now their plan of getting away is lost. But Harry doesn't let him in the door. So he breaks
another
down.
cowardice. Yeah, another cowardice thing. He even has cowardice on his face. He's like backing away. Like it's just yeah.
And it's like he's clear. There's nobody. It's not like opening the door. You're going to let in a bunch of these things. But Ben breaks down the door, maybe kind of proving Harry's point that the doors aren't that secure. But he breaks down the door, and inside the house he starts punching the crap out of Harry. Punched him 4 or 5 times right in the face.
Deservedly so.
Absolutely.
I would have thrown him out.
We see that this is where the movie's already like going into territory that we hadn't seen before. But this is where it really kicks into high gear. The ghouls go ravage the bodies of Tom and Judy. And we see them eating intestines, eating guts, eating liver, eating body parts, eating feet, hands. It's shocking at the time. No one had seen anything like it.
And it's like
every envelope.
It's a crescendo to this movie. Like all this tension was building up to this.
And for many of the body parts, they got them as throwaway parts from a local butcher, and it was real. A lot of them were real meat.
Yeah, which again, I'm a huge fan of. Like anytime they the special effects where they try to make it as authentic as they can, I think that's awesome.
For budgetary reasons, the film was shot in black and white, although color technology was certainly available at the time. But it was much cheaper to shoot it in black and white. The thing that the black and white gives you, as we talked about before, is chocolate syrup has the perfect texture and flow,
consistency. Yeah.
I
was thinking that when like later when you see the blood like the blood on the wall, like I was like, oh, that's right, that's the chocolate syrup Jerry was talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe that made the real organs that they're munching on a little tastier. You get a fresh raw liver covered in chocolate syrup. Maybe it's delicious. I don't know. I will never find out.
Enjoying it, like
yeah, this is pretty good.
Hey, when's lunch? No, you had that organ meat with the chocolate syrup.
So that scene was a shocker for a lot of people at the time. They couldn't believe what they were watching. Humans eat other humans and guts and body parts. It was just mind blowing.
Yeah, it's one of those things I wish I could be a fly on the wall. Go back in time and just kind of witness people's reactions to movies like this when they first came out.
Yeah. We're kind of in an era where it's almost impossible to shock us.
Who gets shocked? Yeah.
But I want to stand in those long lines and see The Exorcist in the theaters when it comes out. Yeah. I want to go to the drive-in and see what's this Night of the Living Dead everybody's talking about, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Experience those things when they're brand new and nothing like it's ever been done before would be awesome. My
dad saw The Exorcist in the theaters when it came out.
Did he give you a review?
He loved it.
Really? Cool.
Yeah.
In the discussion after he knocks the crap out of Harry reveals that Karen was bit by one of the ghouls earlier, because he says, "What's wrong with her? What's she sick of?" She got bit by one of those things earlier, and they're like, "Oh, who knows what kind of disease they carry?" Which is like a very simple foreshadowing. They're watching the 3 a.m. news for an update on what's going on, and the power goes out. TV, lights, everything gone. The ghouls take a full charge on trying to break in, and Ben's trying to fight them off, but Harry won't help. His cowardice reveals itself again.
Yeah.
Instead, he tries to grab the gun that Ben had set down while he's trying to push these creatures away. And they end up scuffling and fighting, and Ben shoots Harry. who in turn staggers down to the cellar.
Yeah, you know what I liked about that scene? It wasn't a big argument. It wasn't a big standoff. It wasn't a big speech he had to make. He looked at him, thought for a second, and said, "I know what I need to do," and just
Yeah,
did it. Yeah,
and it
which
was
I
a
think it's less is more effective sometimes. You don't have to have this big, you don't have to have a Clint Eastwood line. You just
right,
looked at the guy and went, and he's like, "All right, this has to get done."
and it was a culmination of things. He realized I'm not going to survive the night with this guy here,
Yeah, that's three strikes, bud.
sticking me in the back every chance he gets.
Right. Yeah.
So Helen goes down to see what's going on and check on, Harry just got shot and goes down the steps. And she goes down to find their young daughter. I think she's 8 or 9 years old,
Hmm.
feeding on her father. The little girl is hunched over him and just eating his arm.
I think this part right here is the most shocking part of the film.
It was awesome. She's got the look in her eye, and
Yeah.
she perfectly represents what she is now.
Yeah.
And she's just eating her father, eating his
Demonic
arm.
daughters, right?
Yeah, yeah. So in a part that's a little unrealistic, Helen is now like screaming, and Karen comes at her, and rather than do anything, run away, push her away, anything, she just recoils in fear, screaming. Well, Helen takes a trowel off one of the shelves in the basement and just starts stabbing her repeatedly over and over and over. And it's interesting about this movie in zombie lore. Like you said, this created the template, but you see zombies using tools. You see zombies killing with something other than their crazed, teeth eating flesh, flesh eating.
Yeah,
teeth.
they're murdering with weapons, right?
Murdering with weapons, and that's something. It kind of moved away from that as the lore moved on, but it's very interesting that it almost creates a more frightening zombie because who knows what they could do.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why they moved away from that. I'd like to see more zombies kill with trowels. Like we need. Has there been another zombie trowel kill since this?
I don't know. It kind of comes back in Day of the Dead in 1985 when Bub picks up the gun and recognizes, he remembers what this is and what to do with it.
That's right. Yeah.
But for him, it's like a revelation that's part of his training that was trying to, kind of domesticate him.
Yeah.
For Karen, it's just, oh, here's a trowel. I'm going to stab the crap out of my mother and eat her.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked it.
Yeah, I did too. It was cool and shocking. The ghouls are breaking in upstairs. Johnny and Barbara. Barbara's finally trying to help for the first time in the entire movie. And through one of the openings, the board breaks and it's Johnny. It's zombified Johnny.
Yeah.
And she kind of like gives up at that point. He grabs her and drags her out, and we know Barbara's cooked at this point.
Yep.
At this point, Ben, he's getting overwhelmed. He's getting swarmed. The attack of the farmhouse, the trope now that was used in like Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Yeah.
Was
yeah.
the exact same setup, to music, but it's the
right.
farmhouse getting swarmed. Ben's getting overrun. He retreats to the basement, locks those two, puts the two big double locks in, and now he has to shoot the entire Cooper family, who have all reanimated and slowly coming at him.
Yeah. So yeah, the horror is kind of seeping in at all angles at this point. There's one guy left.
Upstairs, or before the basement door, the fake basement door, the zombies can't get through, and they kind of lose interest and kind of slowly shuffle off.
And it's kind of like claustrophobic looking with that shot, because you have like a room full of shoulder to shoulder zombies just kind of like just looking around, and you're just like, it kind of gives you, like, we have that effect now where they can do it with like hundreds of CGI zombies or whatever. But I mean, you have this one like living room, and there's just like 10 people shoulder to shoulder, like aimlessly, like, where do we go? What do we do? It's just like this mindless death virus that just wanders around, and there's no way to get away from it.
Yeah, the ironic part about this, and I love that Romero isn't afraid to twist things on their head,
Hmm.
even with his first film. Um, Ben represented, other than striking Barbara, but Ben represented what we would want in that scenario. What do we got to do to solve this problem? I'm going to try to fix things. I'm going to try to do whatever needs to be done.
Stay calm and cool. Yep.
He is heroic in almost every sense. But the twist is Cooper was actually right.
Yes, yes,
They could
yes.
have opened all the doors, locked that basement, went down there,
And they would have been fine.
and they would have been fine. So it's
Yep.
it's like it turns it completely on its head at the last minute, and you're like, oh crap. And Ben ends up surviving the night untouched in the
Yeah,
basement. It's like
he survives the night with Cooper's I think that's just great storytelling. You know.
it's such a twist, and you're like, oh my
Yep.
God. The
Yep.
guy who we hated was right all along.
Yes, yeah, I agree 100%. That you know what, that twist makes the movie that much better.
It does. In the morning, the cleanup crews are, they're going around. It's like a posse. It's the sheriff, but he's got a bunch of, it's rural Pennsylvania. It's outside of Pittsburgh. Everybody's
Hmm.
got a pickup truck and a gun and a hunting dog, and away
Yeah,
they go. Right? So they're shooting them. They're creating bonfires, burning the bodies, and they move towards the farmhouse. This group. Ben hears the gunshots. He comes upstairs and he walks up to the window to look out, and he's shot between the eyes by one of the clearing crew.
yep,
And it's one of the biggest gut punch endings,
yeah.
because this is the guy you've been rooting for since 10 minutes into the movie. He was the designated hero, and he dies senselessly, needlessly, and in just a abrupt, almost a throwaway moment. It's just
And
like,
there's no redemption. Like when they shoot him, they're like, "Oh, there's one. Take him out." Roger that. Shoots him. He's like, "All right, another one, gentlemen. Let's go." And like they don't even know what they did.
right.
They don't even know if he was a zombie or not. There's no like, "Oh my God, we shot a guy," and he has his last breath moment where he's nope, none of that. They just like,
Yep.
"Here,
It's
there's
just
another
over.
one."
Drag him to the pile.
It's just mindless. Yeah, it's mindless violence. Yep.
It is such a gut wrenching ending. The more I watch it, the more aggravating, in a good
Yeah.
way. It's great
But
storytelling, but man, why wouldn't you shout out, "Hey guys,
yes.
hey"?
Hey, hey. Yeah, yeah. Who knows? I mean, who knows what anyone would do in situations like that, right? But you know me, I love dreary endings like that. I love it.
Yeah, I
When I
do. I
see
do too.
when I see something like that ends like that, I'm just like, yeah, there you go. That's how you make a horror movie. There's no happy ending to this, folks.
Yeah. So that's the end of the movie. Like you said, there's nothing. It's just
That's it.
this character we've been following his whole story. Hey, what happens next? What happens next is his dead carcass is dragged out to the burn pile, and
And
that's
he
it.
doesn't even have a name tag. Yeah,
It's depressing.
it
But
is.
so brilliant. And this movie broke
Yeah,
so many boundaries. It changed so many things. Again, to me, the birth of modern horror is this film, and
yeah.
its impact is still being felt to this day. And in fact, in pre-production is the last screenplay written by George Romero, Twilight of the Dead, and it's being made. He will have a screenwriter credit on it. I don't know when it's coming out, but
We'll be there to review it and talk about it.
it is supposed to be, per his wife, who's the keeper of all of his
Yep.
his art at this point. It is supposed to be the complete culmination of the cycle of his dead stories.
I
Uh,
can't wait.
so it's. I hope they handle it properly. I hope they get the right people involved and do it justice, because it's, so many filmmakers have been influenced by Romero, and specifically by the Dead series. It would be an injustice to wrap it up with a crappy version of his final story.
Yeah, yeah. So, I believe I think it'll be done properly. I think that's why it's taking this long. I think sometimes when projects take this long, I think it's because they're handled properly, and they're looking to make sure all the pieces come together the right way. And good things are worth the wait. I've seen lots of amazing movies, and you'll hear stories like it took 12 years for this movie to come together, and it's like, well, I see why. They wanted it done properly. So it's worth the wait, and we'll see what happens.
Certainly hopeful, but yeah, it would be a fitting legacy to wrap up this amazing, influential series with an awesome
And
finale.
I think the industry knows that, and we'll make sure that homage is paid properly. So I think it'll be done right.
Absolutely. Well, so that is the best of the 1960s, a very tumultuous, a very culturally relevant and historically relevant decade, and also a great decade for horror. It broke in with Psycho and wrapped up with Night of the Living Dead. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of great movies. We've covered a couple of them, and there's probably some more that we'll cover.
For sure. All right. Well, that is our show for this week. We appreciate you listening or watching, however you're catching us. As always, we're the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That is Matt, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.